me the first thing again that you, that was my...
The first one was what were your favorite pastimes while growing up? What chores or responsibilities did you have as a child? And I'm interviewing my father, Wayne Gronefeld. As we started earlier, it is still the 29th of November 2013.
I spent most of my growing up years, or a lot of my growing up years, I guess I'd say, in St. Charles on Jackson Street. Went to Lincoln School. There were several kids who lived within 2 or 3 blocks of our house, and so we would play together quite often. Richard Fromme was probably my best friend at that time, and another young man who lived down the street, a boy whose name was Jerry Rothermick, was another one of my friends. And we mostly rode our bikes or trikes. In those days, it wasn't any problem. You could ride it on the sidewalk, any place you wanted to go. Ride on the street if you wanted to. There wasn't much traffic. We lived near a big hill, and so in the wintertime when it snowed, we could pull our sleds up the top of the hill and sleigh ride down the hill. That was always fun. Played lots of cowboys and Indians. There was a cabinet maker shop about 6 blocks from where we lived, and one of the things we also did was just kind of explore around the neighborhood. And at some point in time we discovered that they had scraps of wood that they would just throw out, and they'd give us pieces of wood we could use to make bows for our bows and arrows and stuff like that. Sometimes we just hung around. There was a Coca-Cola distributing place up on the end of the block where we lived, and sometimes we'd just go in there and watch those guys load the trucks and unload the trucks. Jerry Rothermick's family had a garden, and they had a vineyard. Well, it wasn't a vineyard, a grape arbor. And when the grapes would ripen, we'd oftentimes go down there and sit in the shade and have fresh grapes off the grape arbor. When I was growing up, World War II was going on, and across the alley from us was a automobile parts store. It's called H.C. Usick, and we used to also, another one of our entertainment things was they would bring their boxes that they got their stuff in, and they'd pile them in the back of the store in the alley, and they would burn them, and we would pretend that that was Hitler and Mussolini that they were burning. There was also a beauty shop across the alley from us, just up the alley a little ways. And in those days, when women had their hair curled or permanents, they had some sort of a foil paper that they used to roll up the hair while they were curling it and styling it. And then when they unrolled the hair and took the hair down and combed it into the style they wanted, they would throw away those shiny little pieces of paper, and they would also, that beauty shop would also put that stuff back in the alley for the garbage man to pick up, and we oftentimes rummaged through there and made silver nuggets out of those little things and pretended that they were silver nuggets. I had a dog whose name was Buster, and so I played with him quite a bit. And then when my brother Dallas got a little bit older, he would join us once in a while, although we tried to dump him as often as we could because he was younger. But that's the kind of stuff that we would do. We had, after we lived there for a while, a couple of years I guess, our next door neighbor, we had neighbors on either side of us, and one of those neighbors' husband worked for the Coca-Cola warehouse. It was just up the street, and for some reason they decided to move down the street. Well, when they moved, a new family moved into that house where they had lived. Their name was Cook, and his family, the Cook family, owned a grocery store.
Just the new folks that moved in?
The new folks who moved in owned a grocery store on, I believe it was on 2nd Street in St. Charles. And it was Mom and Dad and a son whose name was Wayne, and Grandma lived there. And Wayne would oftentimes, he always seemed to have more money than the rest of us. And he joined our little group of guys who were playing together and so forth. And there was a big vacant lot behind that Coca-Cola plant. And we'd play up on that lot sometimes with cowboys and Indians stuff. Well, on occasion, he would have all kinds of good stuff, like candy and bologna for bologna sandwiches. We go up there and camp out. He'd provide all that stuff. But come to find out, it was stealing from his folks, stealing money from his folks, and then buying the stuff and treating us. So when my mom found that out, well then that ended really in a hurry. Couldn't have anything that Wayne Cook gave us anymore. I went to Lincoln School, and let's see, I walked there. I'm trying to think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It was about 12 blocks from where I lived. Nice walk, and always had somebody to walk with or whatever.
You mean other children or?
Other children, yes. Richard Fromme, now the Rothermick, Jerry Rothermick did not walk with us because he was Catholic and he went to the Catholic school, so he didn't walk with us. But the Lincoln School had grades 1 through 8. As I remember, there was only one classroom of each one, so it was probably about 200 kids, something like that maybe. I can remember as a little bitty guy, like a first or second grader, I guess, one of the kids in our class, his dad or his uncle or someone must have been in the service, and somehow this kid got a hold of model airplanes, not the wooden model airplanes. These were made out of hard rubber. They were used to train military personnel how to identify aircraft, and he would bring those to school sometime and we could play with them recess time. I don't know how in the world he ever got them, but that was something that was really fascinating to me anyway. I guess my favorite teacher, my principal's name was Mrs. High, Miss High. She wasn't a Mrs. Mildred High, and her family owned a hardware and paint store in St. Charles on Main Street, and that building is now the Lewis and Clark restaurant. And she was my principal. I think my favorite teacher was a lady named Mrs. Nichols. She was my 4th grade teacher. I don't remember any of my other teachers, but I do remember her. Also, in our class, and I played with this kid also, but he wasn't he apparently didn't go to school with us throughout the time that we were there. Just, he came later, I think. His name was Itsu Aramura. He was a Japanese boy, Japanese American. And I can remember, since this was during the war, I guess this must have been when he came. I must have been a 4th or 5th grader at the time. Probably a 4th grader. I can remember our teacher making up some excuse so that he was gone out of the room, and she lectured us about how we should treat him, reminding us that even though his parents were of Japanese descent, that he had nothing to do with the war, and we should treat him just like the rest of us. And he was a real nice kid. I can remember going to where he lived. He lived in a subdivision called Powell Terrace. And I think maybe his father might have been a government worker, but I'm not sure about that. But Powell Terrace had some open areas where the kids could play, and I remember going over and playing with him. But recess, we played kickball and baseball and softball and stuff like that. And did have one incident in the wintertime that I think about a lot, particularly when I watch A Christmas Story, when one of the kids stuck his tongue on there were 2 levels in the playground, and steps going from one to the other, and a metal railing down the steps, and some kids got his tongue frozen on the railing, so that was kind of funny. One time, when we lived in St. Charles, my younger brother Dallas, I don't know if he broke this or whether it fell on the floor, got knocked off or whatever, but my mom had a little dog statue. It was china, made out of china, and somehow the rear leg got broken off of that dog, and Dallas was laying on the couch messing with that broken leg, and it popped in his mouth and he swallowed it. So he told Mom. Well, she got all excited, of course, and called the doctor, Doc Jenkins. And Doc Jenkins said, nothing you can do much about it. He said, just wait a couple days, you'll appear again. Sure enough, it did. But she had to spend a little time with some unpleasantness to find out that was going to be true. But it didn't seem to hurt him. I think the doctor told her to feed him some bread, and then just watch a couple days and it'll reappear, which it did. And then one other time, well, since our house wasn't air conditioned, none of them were. A lot of times in the summertime, in the evening, my folks and the neighbors would sit out on the front porches to kind of get out where it was cooler, and the adults were on the front porch, and Dallas and I were in the backyard. And in those days, we had a small front yard and a little bit larger backyard, but still relatively small. In those days, you mowed the lawn, you had a push mower, and it had a reel on it, and you pushed that over the grass, and the reel would collect the grass blades and throw it against the blade, and then the reel would come around and hit the blade and cut off the grass. Well, we had a lawnmower like that, but what we were doing was we were messing around. And I had taken that lawnmower and picked the handle up and brought it forward and tied it to the back of my tricycle, and I was riding around. Well, when you did that, as soon as the wheels started turning, one of them was a drive wheel, and so it would drive that reel around and around the reel went. Well, Dallas was on the back, and they usually had a rod on it. He was pushing on that rod, and he slipped, and his thumb went underneath that reel and zhick, sliced his thumb. Well, he went screaming to the front of the house, blood flying everywhere. Took him to the hospital and got him patched up, but it did screw up his thumb because he can't bend his middle knuckle. Well, it goes like this now, and I forget which hand it's on now. But anyway, so I got in trouble for that because I was the older one. I should know better than to be doing stupid stuff like that. And I mentioned we had a neighbor on one side, the Cooks. On the other side of us was the neighbor called, their name was Meyer, a couple who had no children, and they rented out a room to a man whose name I can't remember. We called him Uncle so-and-so. He wasn't any relative of ours, but that's what we called him. This man was a car salesman for Wilkie Motors, and Wilkie Motors was located on the located on the corner of West Clay and I think that's Tompkins, but I'm not sure. And I'm not sure what's there right now. They've since torn it down, built something else.
Was that where Zeiser Dodge was?
That's where Zeiser was after Wilkie, yes.
That's where he bought
What bought the
a Pinto there, didn't he, or something?
no, the Daytona.
Daytona.
Anyway, this guy was, I'm sorry?
It was on the right-hand side of West Clay. Is that right?
Yes, as you're going downtown.
As you're going downtown.
This guy was a car salesman there, and he would bring home some of the new vehicles. Well, on occasion, he might say to you, or to us kids, "Would you like to drive to Kansas City?" Well, we knew what that meant. What it meant was, you get in the car and sit on my lap at the steering wheel, and we'll drive down to the end of the block, and you do the steering. Well, we thought that was great. So every once in a while we got to do that. And that was always a big deal. got to drive the car. And as I say, we lived there till about, well, 1948. We moved away for a year and then came back for just a short period of time, and then moved to the country. I guess at that time St. Charles had maybe 12,000 people, so it was a typical small town. Had 3 movie theaters: the Strand, the Roxy, and the Ritz. The Strand Theater was located on 2nd Street, about where the county offices are located now, or the county courts are located now. The Roxy was located on Main Street. I don't know what's there now. I think it was a restaurant last time I was there. It's on the river side of Main Street. And the Ritz was down on South Main, on the same side of the street. Well, it was not unusual for the neighborhood kids to go to Saturday movies, and we'd walk there and walk back, and most often we would go to the Strand, which was on 2nd Street. So that had to be a mile and a half, something like that. Didn't think anything of it. And the oldest one of us would have been, well, 9 years old. I can't imagine turning an 8-year-old kid loose now, having them walk anywhere. Hell, you can't even let them go to the bathroom by themselves. So it was a good place to grow up. Quite often, when we got finished with the movie, if we were at the Strand, you were right close to the end of the old St. Charles Bridge, and that was always a thrill. They had a walkway, they had a catwalk on that bridge. You could walk across the bridge, and that was always a thrill because that catwalk was wire mesh. It wasn't solid, so you could walk and you'd get over the top of the river and you could look down and see the river. So that was always a thrill. And quite often we wouldn't usually walk all the way over to St. Louis County side halfway and come back. So it was a good place to live and a good time to grow up. I didn't have many responsibilities when we lived in St. Charles. In fact, I do know we had an ash pit in the back of the yard, and they burned a lot of their trash. My folks did, but I don't ever remember that it was my job to take the trash out there.
Was your father working?
He was working at the quarry.
At that time.
Yes.
And that's down on by the river.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yes, by the family, not quite as far as the family arena, but yes, down on the river, right where it is now.
Right where it is now.
Yes.
But
yes, and it seemed to be like a bigger operation at that time than what it is now. Once we moved into when we moved to Cottleville and lived with my grandfather, then most of my responsibilities had to do with helping with the water and the oil for the heating stoves, and once in a while I'd help my grandfather. The floor in that tavern was wood, but was not finished in the sense that it had not been sanded and then stained and then a finish put over the top of the stain. I guess originally it had just been bare wood and swept as clean as possible and oiled. And when I say oiled, I mean oiled. They used oil on it. It was dark, black almost. And every once in a while, he would sweep that floor again and oil it again. And that preserved the wood. Of course, it made it a fire trap too, I imagine, but nobody paid much attention to that. Anyway, so I would help him maybe sweep that floor, stuff like that. And help with the water and the heating oil. But otherwise, I didn't have many responsibilities. I don't remember having to mow the lawn or anything like that. When we moved to the country on McClay Road, I was then a 7th grader. So my parents always had, my father always had maybe a head of beef, but not always. He usually had maybe one head of beef, but he had several hogs all the time. And so I helped feed the hogs. Later on, they became a 4-H project for me, and so then I took care of them, fed and watered them. On occasion, on occasion, when I was on vacation, I would go down to my grandfather's and help him with his farming. He still farmed with a combination of horses and a tractor or two. So I learned to drive horses and work with a tractor. And he had a large barn where he kept his horses. He also had pigs and cows. Very rarely did I help do the milking or anything like that, but I did work with him out in the field. Sometimes, I mean, that usually was more in the summertime when I was not going to school. And the butchering time, I helped with butchering. I didn't do much, but I was able to fetch wood and help with the cooking of the meat outside and help with turning the stuffer and turning the grinder occasionally, although most of the time my family had an electric grinder, so that wasn't a big problem. After we lived there for a while, my dad built a smokehouse, and so then when we were smoking the meat after we butchered it, when I was about an 8th grader, I remember that in the morning before I got on the bus, I'd be sure there was enough wood on the smoking fire to smoke all day long, and then when I came home I would replenish it for the night. Did that until the smoking was done. Help cut up fat for making lard, help cook the lard, and with the cleanup and stuff like that. So those kind of things. I don't remember that I had to mow the lawn. Just don't remember doing that. Well, we always had a garden, and so I worked out in the garden. Quite often, my cousins from St. Louis County would come out and spend maybe a week with us, and we would work in the garden. That was usually in the summertime, so they would help in the garden. We didn't usually help my grandfather because he had a philosophy that one boy is work and two boys are play. And so when you had three of them, you didn't have anything. So he just kind of let us go on about our thing.
Have I told you that little proverb that was in like 15th century? One boy is a boy, two boys, half a boy, three boys, no boy at all.
Yeah, that's right. You did tell me that, yes.
Well, sounds like that made it all the way up to you.
So that's the kind of thing that we would do. Those are the kinds of responsibilities we had. Now, occasionally I remember some incidents where Dallas and I did get into some difficulties. My grandparents had chickens, and during the day they would just run all over. There was no nearby roads with traffic or anything like that. So they just run all over the barnyard, and then at nighttime they'd go in the house, in the chicken house, and shut the door, protect them from foxes and whatever. Well, we got the bright idea one time when my grandparents were gone into town. Somehow we got the idea that it would be fun to go down to Grandpa's and annoy the chickens. And the way we did that was we took a BB gun with us and we'd shoot the chickens in the rear end, and when that BB hit them, they go whoop, they'd jump up, and we thought that was pretty funny. So we were doing that for an hour and a half, I don't know, and quit before they got home. But unfortunately, Grandma started killing the chickens. And so after she had killed several of the chickens, she contacted Mom and said, I think you need to talk with the boys because I'm finding all kinds of BBs in the rear ends of my chickens, and I think they're shooting them. So that caused us a bit of a problem. And one time, my grandfather also had a philosophy, it's right good yet, which means don't throw that away because it's right good yet and we might need it. So he had an old cultivator behind the barn, behind the, it was actually his garage. Behind his garage, and sat there for years. Weeds grew gone up through it. And one day when they were gone, Dallas and I got the idea it would be kind of neat to take that apart. So we did. We didn't get it all the way apart, but we got it apart enough that it was not usable anymore. And when he got home, I don't think he discovered it right away because it was not something that you went by all the time. But when he did discover it, we were in trouble again. But that was really Dallas's idea, it wasn't mine. But everything was right good yet. And then one time I wasn't actually involved in this, but we frequently would have, our family celebrated mainly Christmas, Easter. We didn't do much celebrating on New Year's, that kind of thing. And when kids were confirmed, we would celebrate that. And when my grandparents were alive, we would go to either my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa Gronefeld's house, or one of my Gronefeld side uncles or aunts' house. And we'd also go to the Casper side, not so much to my grandma and grandpa's house. I don't ever remember going there for Christmas on the Casper side, but we'd go to the aunts and uncles' houses. Well, one time when we were at the Gronefeld side, we were at Grandma and Grandpa Gronefeld's house, and some of the littler kids went outside and were playing, and they got into Grandma's egg stash, and they had an egg fight in the garage and busted a whole bunch of her eggs. Well, they all got in trouble. Luckily, I was old enough that I was still in the house with the adults and stuff. I didn't go outside with them, but that was something that was not a very pleasant thing either. My grandma had the chickens, and Grandma Gronefeld, and she would keep the revenue from the eggs and the chickens that she sold. And I don't ever remember the time when they did not have indoor plumbing, but there must have been a time when they didn't. And so Grandma used some of her egg money and chicken money to have a bathroom built off of the kitchen of the house. Nice little bathroom. Wasn't anything fancy, but nice little bathroom. But my grandfather never used it the rest of his life. Even when she was gone, she died before he did. He didn't use it. He once said, "The world is going crazy. They used to shit outside and cook in the house, and now they cook in the house, and now they shit in the house and cook outside." So he never did do that. He never did use the bath. He didn't want her to build it. He didn't want it, and so he never used it.
Is he talking about barbecuing or something outside?
Yeah, he's talking about barbecuing outside. Anyway, and we used to, the older kids, sometimes if we had Christmas or something like that, well, we celebrated Thanksgiving also. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. But if we had Christmas or one of those celebrations at our house, and the weather was good, sometimes the kids and some of the cousins, particularly the boy cousins, we'd go down to my grandparents' house, which was only about a quarter of a mile away, and we'd have corn cob fights in the barn, which we enjoyed, and nobody really got hurt, but it was something that certainly took up some time, and we had a good time doing it and didn't harm anybody. I can remember that at Christmas time, when we lived in St. Charles, and I was quite a bit younger then, when we lived in St. Charles, we always opened gifts on Christmas Eve. And we did that. The way the house was set up, when you came in from the front porch, it was a living room. Then there was like, I don't know how she blocked that off. It was kind of like an archway. And then you went into what was the dining room, and then behind that there was a door, and that was a kitchen, and then attached to the kitchen was a back porch, an enclosed back porch. And then after you went through that first room and turned to your left, there was a hallway, and there was a bathroom and 2 bedrooms, and there was a basement underneath it. Well, we always had the Christmas tree in the front room, but we didn't have the Christmas tree. The first time you saw the Christmas tree was Christmas Eve, when you went in to get your gifts. And somehow she blocked that off from the rest of the house. Because I know that they didn't wait until then to decorate the tree. Now, Mom's family, I think, waited until Christmas Eve to decorate the tree. And then we would usually go on Christmas Day, or sometimes what my mom calls second Christmas Day, which was the day after Christmas. We'd go to either the Gronefeld side or the Casper side, and then one other day in that week they would go to the other one, and open gifts there usually. Usually on the Gronefeld side particularly, they would draw names, and that's the way that they would, so then you only had to get one gift, or however many people in your family. Thanksgiving was kind of the same way. You go from one house to another house. Usually the adults after the meal or the gift opening would be playing cards. On the Gronefeld side it was usually pinochle. On the Casper side it was usually poker. Almost everybody came all the time. Only people who didn't come as if there were some sort of a conflict with the other side of their family. But we always enjoyed the holidays and looking forward to that. St. Charles decorated, the town was decorated for Christmas. I don't remember going to a Christmas parade, and I never was involved in getting the Christmas tree. That was always done. Santa always did all that work.
If I could just ask a couple of things about some of the things that you've mentioned so far. One is about smoking the meat. You said you did that until it was done. How long would you smoke it?
It depends on what all you got, but it usually was a couple, 3 weeks. Hams and bacons and stuff take longer than sausage, but usually it would be a couple of 3 weeks. First they would either sugar cure it or put it in salt. Sugar cure just means when you put it in salt, you cover it with salt. When you sugar cure it, you cover it with brown sugar and salt mixed together in their various proportions, and I don't remember what those were. I never was involved in that. And then after it's been in there for a week or two, then you hang it. You take that off and brush it off. And hang it in the smokehouse.
You put it like in a tub with that stuff in it?
Tub, or they would maybe a long trough, long wooden trough. Usually if you use the salt and you put it in a metal tub, then your metal tub doesn't last very long, and that it reacts with that. So usually it was a wooden tub of some sort.
And you left it in there for a week or something, and then you hang it up and smoke it?
Right. And the smoke gives it some flavor and puts a crust on the outside. And then they just leave it hang in there. And you could leave it to hang in the smokehouse during the winter. Particularly the hams and the bacons, because you usually smoke those longer than the sausages. So if you wanted to make the sausage like a dried sausage, almost like a jerky, then you'd leave it in there long enough. You could then just leave it hang all winter. And I know my grandparents would just go out to the smokehouse. He would go out to the smokehouse. We wanted some ham, and just slice off some slice of ham and bring it in the house and leave the rest of the ham hang out there. My folks usually had it somewhere in the basement after they smoked it. I remember talking about that. I may have told you this one time before. I remember as a little bitty kid going out and helping my grandfather and his neighbors and his sons and sons-in-laws helping them butcher at my grandfather's place. And while I don't remember too much about individual years of butchering there, I do remember that he had a late 30s or early 40s Plymouth, and it was like, I guess maybe it was just a coupe, and it had just 2 seats in it and a shelf like on the behind the seats to the rear window. And at butchering time, what they would do is he would take that Plymouth and jack up one of the rear wheels and hook the meat grinder, a regular heavy duty meat, hook the handle of that meat grinder to that wheel he had jacked up, start the car, put it in gear. Well, they didn't have positive traction, so when you put it in gear, the free wheel would go around the other, and that's how they ground the meat. That way you didn't have to do it by hand. And I don't think it was before they had electricity. I'm sure I wouldn't have remembered that. But it was before they had purchased an electric grinder. So they were ingenious about using that kind of stuff. Okay, that was one of the questions you said you had.
Yeah, and well, and also you smoke. Did they smoke all the sausage, or would they smoke some of the sausage?
Well, it depended on each individual family's preference, but it was hard to keep the fresh sausage very long, so you didn't usually keep too much of it just fresh. Yeah, so they would smoke most of it, but not all of it.
Just because of practical concerns, you need to smoke it to preserve it.
Right.
I was just curious if that's what you did. And did you celebrate the 4th of July? It seems like Grandma had a big deal, at least when I was a kid, in the summertime, that all of her side of the family would kind of get together. Because I remember putting my hand through her window of her garage playing wiffle ball or some kind of ball where that windowsill was first base, and I missed it. Put my hand through the window. But that was over there at one of her summer soirees, and I was just wondering if that was something you did when you were.
No, not that I recall. No, I do remember. I can't remember what that. Oh, that might have been the fair. One time I couldn't go to some doings because I had the mumps. I had to stay home. I was all swollen up. I can remember sleeping on the back porch, and that was in the summertime, because that's one of the reasons we did sleep on the back porch occasionally, in order to keep cooler. But I don't remember too many 4th of July as such. Now, when my folks bought the place in Licking, then they would frequently invite the families down. We went down a couple times and have big meals and celebrations and stuff like that there. But no, I don't remember 4th of July much.
Okay, I guess I just thought Grandma mentioned something about that too, about how.
Oh yeah.
How the Gronefeld side of the family didn't get together a whole lot.
No, they didn't.
But the Caspers would get together. and I just maybe I just made that
Yeah.
connection that was that thing that we would go to sometimes. And we usually had ribs, as I recall. That seemed to be kind of one of the things that we would have we'd have barbecued ribs, and Uncle Milt, Aunt Al, and everybody would be there for that. And I put my hand through the window one time.
I don't remember that part either.
Well, I remember that.
Um,
Didn't cut my hand. I didn't get hurt,
Yeah.
but I did do the window in. And I think I remember that because I think kept as we went over there was that one pane that was different than all the other panes. That's the one I put my hand through right there.
Oh, yeah, there's always something like that you remember.
So, if I had another question about something like that,
Okay.
that's those are the two that I remember. I guess.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. Later, when I say later, I mean I was like, we lived in the country, and we continued to butcher even after my grandparents stopped butchering. And when we butchered, then usually Aunt June, Uncle Paul, Bill Denningman, a friend of my dad's, and his wife would come and help. And us kids were old enough that we could do some help too. And each one of those families came out for a couple of reasons. One was to help us, and two was to make delicacies that their families enjoyed, but the rest of us maybe were not familiar with. So that was particularly true for